Hi, welcome back. I hope you've got your pen and a piece of paper ready for the exercise that we're going to be doing in a moment. If you haven't, please get one because you will need it. In this section, we're going to be dealing with preventive strategy number 2, which is all about communicating clearly, clear communication in the needs-focused approach. And the aim behind this is that we want to look at strategies to give instructions to students in a manner that will make it much more likely that they will actually follow them. Okay, so if you've got students who are just ignoring you or arguing with you when you're giving instructions, we're going to look at some ways to get around that and hopefully get your instructions much more effective. Right, you've got your pen and your piece of paper. This is what I need you to do. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to take your piece of paper and draw on it a car. Go. 5 seconds left. You need to draw your car. 3, 2, 1. Beep. Okay, no more drawing, please. You can mark your own picture. Obviously, I'm assuming you're doing this on your own, facing the video. No cheating. Mark your own. Give yourself 1 point if you've got windscreen wipers on your car. 1 point if you've got indicators, indicator lights, front and back on your car. 1 point for front and back. Give yourself 1 point if you've got headlights. 1 point if you've got an aerial. 1 point if you've got a steering wheel. Can't have a car without a steering wheel. 1 point if you've got door handles. 1 point if you've got a tax disc in the window. 1 point if you've got a seat belt. 1 point if you've got an exhaust pipe. And finally, 1 point if you've got a number plate or license plate on your car. Okay, so that's 10 essential features on your motor car, and I'm assuming most of you, because we see cars all over the place every day, will have got at least 9 marks or possibly 10. But then again, you may not have even got 1 or 2 because my instruction wasn't very clear. And certainly when I do this on live seminars, it tends to be the majority of people in the room get 0 marks out of 10. And that's for something that we see every day. It's a very easy, simple task. The point is it could be much, much easier if I'd have made the instruction much, much clearer. If I'd have said, you've got 10 seconds to draw a car on your piece of paper with the following 10 key features, everybody would have got 10 out of 10, it's obvious. But how often do we give instructions to students where in our minds we're fairly clear about what we want them to do, we're fairly clear about the end result that we want and what we expect to see, but we don't convey that to them in a clear enough way for them to give us what we expect to see, to give us what we intend. You take the very simple instruction like sit down. It's just 2 words. Sit down. And you say those to a student, and in your mind you know very clearly what you're expecting to see, which is a student sitting down with 4 chair legs on the floor, with their pen in their hand and their paper in front of them on the table, and they're writing away, and they're quiet and they're focused. That's what you mean when you say sit down. But some students might take that as, well, sit down, but you can sit cross-legged on the floor, or you can sit swinging on your chair, or you can sit down but you don't have to get on with any work yet, or you can sit down talking to your friend. The behaviours that they're giving me at that point are actually not wrong. They're doing exactly what I've said, sit down. Whether they're sitting on the floor or whether they're sitting in their chair working, they're doing what I've said because my instruction isn't clear enough. And a lot of the time, the problems we're getting in the classroom in terms of behaviour are purely and simply because we're not being clear and explicit enough with our instructions. What we need to do with kids is, particularly the challenging students, is give them no room for manoeuvre, no excuse for doing it wrong. They've got to know exactly what to do in order to give you what you want to see. There must be no room for excuse. Think of it as train tracks or a map. If you give them a clear map to follow, a clear set of instructions from which they can't really deviate because the route is so clear, there's a lot more chance of them getting to the destination that you're trying to get them to. There's a lot more chance of them doing what you want them to do. And there's a lot of things involved in that process. And one of the simplest things to bear in mind when you're giving instructions is to, first of all, make sure that you've got the right piece of paper up, is to make sure you give them a clear map, very precise instructions. So rather than sit down, I'd like you to sit down with 4 chair legs on the floor, your piece of paper in front of you, without talking, and get on with the questions in front of you. That's a much clearer instruction than sit down, and it's going to get better results. Next thing you need to be aware of when you're giving instructions is to avoid vague terms. Vague terms such as properly, appropriately, precisely, respectfully. Those words are all abstract terms and they mean different things to different people. The word properly, what is properly? How can you define properly to a kid who doesn't know what properly is? You say sit properly to some of my students, and properly in their homes means swinging around on one leg, because that's the cool way to sit on your chair. When I tell them to be quiet or to talk quietly in their environment at home is talking at this level, because I've got to be heard over everyone else in the house who's shouting. Quietly, properly, appropriately, respectfully, these are all vague, abstract terms that mean nothing to some students and certainly different things to different people. So you've either got to very carefully and clearly define what you mean by those terms beforehand, so that when I say quietly, it means talking at this level. A better way may be to say, use your partner voices, which can only be heard by your partners. You can use your yard voices when you're outside on the yard. Or you could say, use your 30 centimetre voices. And we could even get a ruler out to show that. This is your 30 centimetre voice, because it can only be heard 30 centimetres away. It's not your 30 metre voice, which can be heard in the yard. We've got to either define very clearly what those terms mean, respectfully. What do we mean by respectfully? I'd like you to look at me when I'm talking to you. I'd like you to have your hands by your side. I'd like you not to be fiddling. I'd like you not to be using abusive language. What is abusive language? I'd like you to not use these words. We've got to be very clear about the instructions we give, so that we're giving as few excuses as possible for kids to do the wrong thing. Needs focused is about empowerment, and it works both ways. If we give those kids the maximum chance of success by giving clear instructions and telling them exactly what we want them to do, it's going to be better for both parties. We're making their job easier and our job easier. We also need to be aware of paraverbals, paraverbal communication, the way in which things are said, not just the words. It's not just about the words we use. They're important. We need to define those abstract terms and we need to give clear, explicit instructions, but we also need to think about what our body's saying when we're giving instructions, because our eyes, our gestures, our facial expressions, even the position of our body or our proximity to a student is going to convey a different message depending on who we're speaking to and what we're saying, as is the volume and tone of our voice. Because sometimes it can be really, really different depending on what you want to convey in your voice. Now, we've already looked at assertive teachers, hostile teachers, and weak teachers in the section on attitudes, and we're going to come back to this when we come to responses later on in the program. We're going to look in much more detail at those three types of teacher, the weak teacher, the hostile teacher, the assertive teacher or the needs-focused teacher, and more in detail on communication. But for now, these are just things to bear in mind about getting your message heard, getting your message across. Now, getting back to the body language and the facial expressions and the tone of voice, all those things are going to affect how your message is interpreted by a student. So let's go back to those two words that we were using, sit down. How many different ways could you say those two words? Without changing the actual words, sit down, we could give a completely different message. A weak teacher, a permissive teacher, it may be very much body language like this and a very quiet voice, and maybe even a little question in the tone, sit down, as if I'm saying, would you sit down? Could you sit down? Will you sit down? It's more of a questioning tone. Or it may be that I'm just really fed up and my tone is more, sit down. Now at that point, a student who's hearing a teacher talking like that is going to make their mind up and run a few little calculations in their head and say, Mr. Plevin's losing it. He's getting very, very stressed out. He's worn out. If we push a little bit harder and a little bit further, he's going to flip his lid. So if you're given the impression that you're really worn out, a lot of your students might exploit that. It may be that you get someone side and, oh, sir, you look really tired, have a rest. But it's not very likely, not in some of the classes that most of us are teaching. The other end of the scale, it might be that you're more of a hostile approach with these students. Sit down! There's no argument. You do it now. Now again, students are going to react to that in different ways. A little calculation going on, I can't stand you, I really hate your guts. I'm going to do it, I'm going to sit down, but I tell you what, I'm not going to do anything else for you, I'm not going to do any work because I really don't like you, I don't like the way you talk to me. You make me feel not nice. So that hostile approach, you maybe get some kids harbouring feelings of revenge. I'm going to get you back later, I'm sick of you. Well, you might get it right in your face there and then. Who the hell are you talking to? You certainly get that in some schools. So the paraverbals, the way we say things, incredibly important. If we were going to be an assertive teacher, a needs-focused teacher, then it may well be that as well as the two words, we add some gestures. And we're conveying that we are incredibly confident, we're incredibly sure of ourselves, and we expect you to do what we're saying. And it's coming across in my voice and my tone. And my tone's warm. There's no argument with what I'm saying. I'm expecting you to do it. But I'm not going to be hostile, and I'm certainly not going to be weak. Sit down. So bear in mind, paraverbals, avoiding vague terms, and giving them a very clear, precise map.